Professor Zixtal's 4 eyes narrowed as she reviewed the application before her, compound pupils dilating with concern. The datapad displayed the credentials of Kai Rodriguez, the latest addition to the Galactic Academy of Sciences' pioneering cross-species exchange program. The human's qualifications were impressive. Top marks from Earth's Massachusetts Institute of Technology, groundbreaking research in xenobiology, and glowing recommendations. Yet, like many of her colleagues, Zixtal harbored doubts. Another human, she chittered to her colleague. Professor Venth, a gaseous being who maintained form through an elaborate containment suit. And this one wants to join the advanced xenobiology program. The Council mandates we accept qualified applicants from all Federation species, Venth's synthesized voice replied, tinged with resignation. Even Deathworlders. The term hung heavy in the Climate Control Office. Humans had only joined the Galactic Federation 3 years ago, and their classification as Deathworlders, species that evolved on planets most other sentients considered uninhabitable, preceded their reputation. Their short history with the galactic community was already filled with incidents that both amazed and terrified other species. At least, this one's academic record suggests they understand proper scientific methodology. Zixtal conceded, approving the application with a press of her manipulator appendage. Though I suspect they'll struggle with the practical aspects of our program. 3 weeks later, Kai Rodriguez stepped through the quantum displacement gates onto the Academy's sprawling campus, carved into an asteroid at the heart of the Arcturus system. Their dark skin gleamed with a thin sheen of sweat. The environmental systems were calibrated for the comfort of a dozen different species, none of them human. Standing 2 meters tall, with broad shoulders, and the dense musculature typical of their species, Kai cut an imposing figure among the predominantly smaller or more ethereal alien students. They carried a single travel case, built to withstand atmospheric re-entry, another habit that marked humans as different. Other species simply transmitted their consciousness between bodies or manifested what they needed. Student Rodriguez, a hovering mechanical platform approach, bearing Professor Zixtal's distinctive arachnoid form. Welcome to the Galactic Academy of Sciences. I trust your quantum displacement was satisfactory. Thank you, Professor. Kai smiled, careful not to show teeth. They'd studied extensively about interspecies etiquette. The displacement was fine, though I admit I missed the old-fashioned way of traveling through space. There's something romantic about watching the stars streak by. Zixtal's mandibles twitched in what Kai recognized as the equivalent of a surprised blink. Most species considered traditional space travel barbarically dangerous and uncomfortable. Yes, well, the professor recovered quickly. Your quarters have been modified to Earth-standard gravity and atmosphere. Though I must warn you, the advanced xenobiology program requires students to adapt to various environmental conditions. We cannot always accommodate individual species preferences. Of course, Kai nodded, their excitement evident despite maintaining professional composure. That's partly why I chose this program. There's so much to learn about how different species adapt and evolve. The variations in biological solutions to survival are fascinating. The professor's next words carried a hint of challenge. Indeed. Though I should mention that tomorrow's class begins with practical observation of crystalline entities from the Void Dancer species. Most new students find them challenging. Kai's eyes lit up. The silicon-based photovores from the Carina Nebula. I've read every published paper about them. Is it true they respond to electromagnetic harmonics? It was Zixtal's turn to show surprise. Most students, upon hearing about Void Dancers, expressed fear or at least healthy caution. These beings were notoriously difficult to study, their crystalline bodies capable of focusing light into deadly beams, their movements unpredictable and hypnotic. You've studied them already. Only theoretically, Kai admitted. But their described movement patterns remind me of certain Earth phenomena. I have some theories I'd love to test, with proper safety protocols, of course. The professor felt her initial skepticism wavering slightly. This human didn't display the brash overconfidence she'd expected, but rather a measured enthusiasm backed by obvious preparation. Well, she managed. We shall see how those theories hold up in practical application. The observation chamber is rated for Class 9 containment. It should be sufficient for most outcomes. As she guided the human toward their quarters, Zixtal found herself wondering if perhaps she'd need to revise some of her assumptions. The next day's class would certainly prove interesting, one way or another. What she couldn't know was just how dramatically a single human student would change the Academy's understanding of xenobiology and of humanity itself. The observation chamber hummed with electromagnetic shielding as 23 students from across the galaxy gathered to witness their first practical session with the Void Dancers. Most kept a respectful distance from the reinforced quantum blast barrier, their various sensory organs fixed on the crystalline chamber beyond. Kai stood closest to the barrier, their breath slightly fogging the surface. Inside the chamber, 3 Void Dancers hung suspended in the artificial gravity field, each one a complex lattice of translucent crystal, refracting light in impossible patterns. Their structures constantly shifted and reformed, creating shapes that seemed to hurt the mind if observed too long. Students, Professor Zixtal's voice cut through the tense atmosphere. Your midterm assignment will be to document and analyze the behavioral patterns of the Void Dancers. Each of you will be assigned one specimen to study. You must determine their primary mode of communication and establish a basic protocol for predictable interaction. A ripple of dismay passed through the assembled students. The Helix Mind Collective near the back of the room pulsed deep purple with anxiety. Even the usually stoic quantum architects, beams of pure energy contained within specialized suits, flickered with uncertainty. Professor, called out Vac, a methane-breathing Jovian, their environmental suit whirring with stress. The historical records show no successful communication with Void Dancers. Every attempt has ended in... They paused delicately. Unfortunate crystallization of the researchers. Precisely, Zixtal replied, her mandibles clicking in what Kai had learned was satisfaction. Which is why this assignment will test not just your technical skills, but your ability to approach seemingly impossible problems. As xenobiologists, you must be prepared to study species that defy conventional understanding. Kai's hand rose, drawing every eye in the room. Some students instinctively backed away. They still weren't used to being near a Deathworlder. Professor, I noticed the Void Dancer's crystalline restructuring follows certain patterns. Would it be possible to access the chamber's full spectrum light sensors? I have a theory about their molecular resonance. Zixtal's 4 eyes blinked in sequence. An interesting approach, Student Rodriguez. Though I must warn you, previous attempts to analyze their patterns have driven several researchers to temporary madness. The shapes they create seem designed to disrupt cognitive functions. That's just it. Kai's excitement was palpable. I don't think they're trying to disrupt anything. On Earth, we have structures called thematics, patterns that form in response to sound waves. What if the Void Dancers aren't creating random patterns, but responding to something we haven't identified yet? The professor's exoskeleton creaked as she shifted position, a sign of intrigue Kai had learned to recognize. You believe their movements are reactions rather than actions. Maybe both. Kai pulled out their datapad, fingers flying over the holographic interface. Look at this recording from the past hour. The changes in their crystalline structure aren't random. They're harmonic, like a dance. Each shift corresponds to subtle variations in the chamber's electromagnetic field. The class crowded around Kai's display, curiosity temporarily overcoming their instinctive caution around the human. The recording showed a time-lapse of the Void Dancer's movements, overlaid with Kai's analysis of electromagnetic fluctuations. Fascinating, breathed Professor Zixtal. Though this still doesn't solve the problem of communication. Even if they are responding to environmental factors, no one has successfully initiated controlled interaction. Kai's smile widened. What if we're thinking about it wrong? We've been trying to talk to them, but maybe we should be trying to dance with them instead. Dance. The word rippled through the translator matrices, each species trying to grasp the concept through their own cultural framework. I'll need to modify some equipment, Kai continued, their fingers already sketching designs in the air. And I'll have to write new programs to generate the right frequency patterns. But if I'm right, we might be able to establish communication through synchronized movement and electromagnetic resonance. Professor Zixtel's mandibles worked silently for a moment. Student Rodriguez, while your theory is innovative, I must remind you that direct interaction with void dancers has proven fatal in 94.3% of documented attempts. With all due respect, Professor, Kai replied, their voice firm but respectful. Those attempts weren't made by someone from a death world. We humans evolved to recognize and respond to complex patterns under extreme pressure. It's how we survived our planet's harshest environments. If anyone can learn to dance with living crystals, it's us. The room fell silent, every being present processing the implications of Kai's words. The human wasn't just proposing a new method of study, they were volunteering to risk direct contact with one of the most dangerous known species in the galaxy. Very well, Professor Zixtel finally responded, her tone carrying both concern and curiosity. You have one standard week to prepare your equipment and safety protocols. If, and only if, they meet our security requirements, we will attempt your dance. As the class dispersed, nervous chatter filling the corridors, Kai remained at the barrier, watching the void dancers shimmer and shift. In their crystalline surfaces, they saw not threat but possibility. A chance to prove that humanity's greatest strength wasn't their durability or their strength, but their ability to find harmony in the most unlikely places. Little did anyone know that this unconventional approach would soon prove vital to the survival of the entire academy. The week passed in a blur of activity that left the academy's engineering department both impressed and slightly terrified. Kai had requisitioned equipment from 6 different research divisions, modified 3 quantum harmonizers, and written an entirely new software suite to translate electromagnetic frequencies into visual patterns. The human worked with an intensity that made even the sleepless quantum architects uncomfortable. They haven't stopped for rest in 36 hours, Professor Venth observed through the workshop's observation window. Even accounting for human stimulants, this level of focus is concerning. Professor Zixtel's crystalline vision arrays tracked Kai's movements as they made final adjustments to what they called the resonance chamber, a modified version of standard containment technology. Humans refer to this state as hyperfocus. Apparently, it's quite normal for their species when pursuing a significant goal. Inside the workshop, Kai stepped back from their creation. The resonance chamber looked like a cross between a terrestrial disco ball and a quantum computer. Its surface was covered in precisely arranged crystalline facets, each capable of emitting specific frequencies of light and electromagnetic radiation. At its core, a sophisticated AI would translate Kai's movements into corresponding energy patterns. Final diagnostic complete, Kai announced, their voice hoarse from lack of sleep, but eyes bright with anticipation. The chamber is ready for testing. The observation room had filled with spectators, not just students, but faculty members and even a few representatives from the Galactic Science Council. News of the humans' unusual approach had spread quickly through the quantum net. Student Rodriguez, Professor Zixtel's voice carried through the comm system. Please review your safety protocols one final time. Kai nodded, standing straighter despite their exhaustion. The resonance chamber is surrounded by 3 layers of quantum shielding. If the void dancer's reactions exceed safe parameters, the emergency containment field will activate automatically. I'll be wearing a modified environment suit with additional crystalline armor plating, designed to diffract any focused energy beams. They paused, then added with a slight smile, "And yes, Professor, I signed all the necessary waivers." A nervous titter ran through the observation room. Humor about potentially fatal experiments was apparently another human trait the galactic community found unsettling. "Very well," Professor Zixtel responded. We will proceed with the introduction of one juvenile void dancer specimen. Please maintain minimum safe distance until... Her voice trailed off as the specimen materialized in the resonance chamber. Unlike the adults they'd observed earlier, this juvenile was smaller, its crystalline structure simpler but somehow more volatile. It immediately began emitting rapid pulses of light, its form shifting erratically. "Fascinating," Kai murmured, already moving closer. "It's scared. The light patterns, they're like the warning coloration of terrestrial animals." Before anyone could stop them, Kai activated their modified suit and stepped onto the resonance platform. The crystalline facets surrounding them began to pulse with soft, rhythmic light. "Student Rodriguez." Professor Zixtel's voice cracked with alarm. "The specimen's energy readings are highly unstable." "That's okay," Kai replied calmly, beginning a slow, deliberate movement. "Watch this." The resonance chamber responded to their motion, generating harmonized waves of light and electromagnetic energy. Kai's movements weren't random. They mimicked the patterns they'd observed in the adult void dancers, but simplified, slowed down, like a teacher leading a nervous student through their first dance steps. The juvenile void dancer froze, its erratic shifting settling into a more regular rhythm. Then, to the astonishment of every being watching, it began to mirror Kai's movements. "By the quantum void," someone whispered in the observation room. "They're actually communicating." Kai continued their careful dance, each movement generating corresponding patterns of energy that the void dancer seemed to understand. Gradually, the creature's own movements became more complex, adding variations to the basic pattern Kai had established. "Professor," Kai called out softly, never breaking the rhythm they'd established. "Are you recording this? The specimen isn't just mimicking, it's introducing new elements. I think it's trying to teach me something." For the next hour, the assembled scientists watched in amazement as human and void dancer engaged in an increasingly complex exchange of movement and energy. Kai would introduce a pattern. The creature would respond and elaborate, and together they would create something entirely new. Remarkable. Professor Venth's synthesized voice was thick with emotion. "They've achieved more meaningful interaction in one session than we managed in 50 years of study." Professor Zixtel's mandibles worked silently for a moment before she responded. Perhaps we were too focused on understanding them through our own frameworks. It took a species familiar with dancing on the edge of death to recognize the beauty in their movements." The session ended not because of any danger or difficulty, but because Kai's modified suit finally ran low on power. As the resonance chamber powered down, and the void dancer was safely transferred back to its regular containment, the human sagged against the nearest wall, exhausted but grinning. That, they announced to the still stunned audience, was the most amazing conversation I've ever had. As medical staff rushed to check on Kai's vital signs and scientists clamored to begin analyzing the recorded data, no one noticed the juvenile void dancer in its containment chamber, still swaying slightly in the pattern Kai had taught it. No one except Professor Zixtel, who found herself wondering if perhaps humans weren't just surviving their harsh world. They were learning to dance with it. And in that moment, she began to understand why these Deathworlders might be exactly what the Galactic scientific community needed. The Academy's success with the juvenile void dancer led to an expansion of the research program. Within weeks, the Xenobiology department had modified 3 more resonance chambers according to Kai's specifications. Other students began learning the basics of crystalline communication, though none showed quite the same intuitive grasp as the human. Which was why, when the containment systems failed, Kai was the first person Professor Zixtel called. "All emergency protocols have been initiated," the professor's voice crackled through Kai's comm unit, higher pitched than usual with stress. "But the adult specimens are not responding to standard containment fields." Kai was already running through the Academy's corridors, their heavy footfalls drawing startled reactions from other beings. How many got out? What triggered the breach? 4 adults, and there was a pause filled with static. And the juvenile you worked with. Initial data suggests a power fluctuation in the quantum grid created a harmonic resonance that destabilized the containment fields. Kay's mind raced. The juvenile, whom they'd privately named Echo, had shown remarkable progress in their sessions. But adult void dancers were far more complex, their crystalline patterns capable of generating devastating energy beams when they felt threatened. Have they shown any signs of aggressive behavior? Kai asked, skidding around a corner to find emergency barriers being erected by security drones. Not yet, but they're moving toward the Academy's main power core. If their energy patterns interfere with the core's quantum matrix, she didn't need to finish. The resulting cascade could tear the entire asteroid apart. I'm heading to the core now, Kai announced, already changing direction. Have everyone else evacuate to safe distance. And Professor, I need you to send all of Echo's interaction data to my suit's computer. Every pattern we recorded, every response we documented. Student Rodriguez. Professor Zixtel's voice softened slightly. The evacuation protocols apply to all personnel, including you. Kai managed a grim smile as they reached the access corridor to the power core. With respect, Professor, I don't think we have time to debate this. Besides, I'm the only one who successfully danced with these beings. The scene that greeted them in the core chamber was both beautiful and terrifying. The 4 adult void dancers had arranged themselves around the quantum core in a complex geometric pattern, their crystalline bodies pulsing with increasing intensity. Echo hovered near them, its movements seemingly uncertain. Kai's modified environment suit registered energy readings well beyond safe levels. The air itself seemed to crackle with potential. Echo. Kai called out, their voice carrying through the chamber's charged atmosphere. Remember me. Remember our dance. The juvenile void dancer's pattern shifted slightly, a flickering that Kai had learned to recognize as recognition. The adults, however, maintained their ominous geometry. Their resonance is building toward critical levels, Professor Zixtel's voice warned through the comm. Student Rodriguez, you have perhaps 3 minutes before. Downloading the interaction data now, Kai interrupted, already moving to activate their suit's external resonators. Echo, help me show your family that we can dance together. What followed would later be described by the Academy's quantum sensors as a symphonic light opera performed in 11 dimensions. Kai began with the simplest pattern they'd ever taught Echo, their suit generating harmonizing waves of energy. Echo responded immediately, falling into the familiar rhythm. The adult void dancers paused in their buildup, their crystalline structures shifting slightly to observe the exchange. That's it, Kai encouraged, gradually increasing the complexity of their movements. Echo, remember variation sequence 3, the one you taught me. The juvenile began weaving the new pattern into their dance, creating an intricate tapestry of light and energy. One of the adults shifted, its own pattern beginning to align with the harmony Kai and Echo were generating. 2 minutes until critical resonance, Professor Zixtel warned. Sweat beaded on Kai's forehead as they pushed their suit's systems to their limits, incorporating elements from every successful interaction they'd documented with Echo. The dance became more complex, more intimate, a conversation about life, growth, and harmony conducted entirely in light and motion. A second adult joined the dance, then a third. The energy readings in the chamber remained dangerously high, but the chaotic buildup toward destruction had transformed into something more structured. 30 seconds, came the warning, just as the final adult void dancer shifted its pattern. No, Kai gasped through gritted teeth, maintaining the intricate choreography despite their exhaustion. Not seconds. Music. It's all music, don't you see? And somehow, incredibly, the void dancers did see. Their combined patterns shifted one final time, aligning with Kai and Echo's dance in a display so beautiful that the quantum sensors recording it actually overloaded. When the emergency response team finally reached the core chamber, they found Kai sitting on the floor, their suit's power completely drained. The void dancers, All 5 of them hovered in a perfect geometric formation that somehow maintained stability without threatening the quantum core. Student Rodriguez. Professor Zixtel's voice shook slightly as she approached. How did you know that would work? Kai looked up, tired but triumphant. I didn't, but I figured if one scared juvenile could learn to dance with us, maybe its family could too. Sometimes you just have to trust in the rhythm. The professor's mandibles clicked rapidly, her species equivalent of astonished laughter. You risked everything on the assumption that a crystalline hive mind would understand the concept of family. No, Kai corrected gently, watching Echo and its family continue their harmonious dance. I risked everything on the belief that understanding family is universal, no matter what you're made of. As emergency teams worked to stabilize the situation, no one could deny that something fundamental had changed. In teaching the Void Dancers to dance, humanity had taught the galaxy something about itself, and about the power of finding harmony in the most unexpected places. 2 weeks after what became known as the Crystalline Convergence, the Galactic Academy's main auditorium was filled to capacity. Representatives from every major scientific institution in the Federation had gathered to witness something unprecedented. The first formal presentation on successful communication with Void Dancers. Professor Zixtel stood at the podium, her exoskeleton polished to a formal sheen. Distinguished colleagues, what you are about to witness represents not just a breakthrough in xenobiology, but a fundamental shift in how we approach interspecies communication. The lights dimmed, and a modified resonance chamber activated in the center of the stage. Inside, Echo and its family group arranged themselves in a complex geometric formation. Then Kai stepped onto the stage, wearing a newly designed interface suit that gleamed with crystalline accents. For decades, Kai began, their voice carrying clearly through the translator matrices. We've approached Void Dancers as subjects to be studied from a safe distance. We categorize them as dangerous, unpredictable, even hostile. But what we never considered was that perhaps we were the ones failing to understand their language. They moved into the resonance field, and the chamber came alive with patterns of light and energy. The Void Dancers responded immediately, their crystalline structures shifting in perfect harmony with Kai's movements. Their entire society is built on resonance, Kai continued, never breaking the rhythm of their dance. Every movement, every pattern, carries meaning. What we saw as random restructuring is actually a complex language of motion and energy, a dance that tells stories, shares knowledge, and builds connections. The audience watched in amazement as Kai and the Void Dancers demonstrated increasingly complex interactions. Patterns of light and crystal merged and separated, formed and reformed, creating shapes that seemed to exist in more dimensions than most beings could perceive. But the most remarkable discovery, Professor Zixtel added, her voice filled with barely contained excitement, was not just that we could communicate with them. It was what they had to teach us. On cue, Echo broke from its family group and began generating a series of intricate patterns. Holographic displays around the auditorium translated the energy signatures into mathematical equations. The Void Dancers aren't just dancing, Kai explained, matching Echo's movements with their own. They're calculating. Every pattern is a mathematical expression of universal constants. They don't just understand quantum mechanics, they live it. Their dance is a continuous solution to the equations that govern our reality. A murmur of astonishment rippled through the audience. The implications were staggering. The Void Dancers weren't just an interesting xenobiological specimen. They were living computers, capable of processing quantum calculations through their very existence. This discovery has already led to significant advances in quantum computing, Professor Zixtel continued. But perhaps more importantly, it has taught us a valuable lesson about assumptions and perspective. Kai guided the dance to a graceful conclusion, the Void Dancers settling into a harmonious formation that seemed to pulse with contentment. We assumed that because they were different, because they were dangerous to approach in conventional ways, that they were beyond understanding. We forgot that sometimes the best way to understand something isn't to study it from a distance, but to find the courage to dance with it. The professor's mandibles clicked in agreement, which brings us to our next announcement. The Galactic Council has approved the creation of a new department, the Institute for Harmonic Studies. This facility will combine xenobiology, quantum physics, and what humans call performing arts in an entirely new approach to interspecies communication. She turned to Kai, all four eyes focusing intently. Student Rodriguez, or should I say, Professor Rodriguez, will you accept the position as the Institute's first director? Kai's surprise was genuine. They looked from the professor to Echo and its family, then to the assembled audience of the galaxy's greatest scientific minds. I would be honored, Professor, though I have one condition. Oh, Professor Zixtel's antenna twitched with curiosity. The Institute needs to be open to everyone, not just established scientists, but anyone willing to learn new ways of understanding. Sometimes the best discoveries come from being willing to try what others consider impossible. The professor's exoskeleton creaked with what Kai had learned was approval. I believe that has already been demonstrated quite thoroughly. As the audience erupted in applause, expressed through various species-appropriate methods, Echo and its family began a new dance pattern. This one was entirely original, a combination of void dancer precision and human creativity that seemed to express something both ancient and entirely new. Kai joined them, their movements now as natural as breathing. In that moment, watching human and crystalline beings move in harmony, even the most skeptical observers had to admit that perhaps the galaxy had been too quick to judge these Deathworlders. Perhaps humanity's greatest strength wasn't their ability to survive harsh conditions, but their talent for finding beauty in them and teaching others to dance along. The Galactic Academy would never be quite the same. But then, as Kai had proven, sometimes the most profound changes come not from fighting the dance, but from learning new steps.